Imagine you're a farmer in rural Montana, no fiber cable for miles. The nearest city is 2 hours away. Your kids need to do homework online. Your business depends on video calls. And every time you try to load a web page, you're stuck with 2 megabits per second, slower than a smartphone from 2010. For decades, that was the reality for hundreds of millions of people around the world. Until the sky changed everything. Today, we're going on a journey, and from the very first satellites orbiting Earth to the moment your internet signal travels 35,000 kilometers into space and back. In less time than it takes you to blink, this is the story of satellite internet. And trust me, it's wilder than you think. Let's rewind. October 4th, 1957. The Soviet Union launches a metal sphere about the size of a beach ball into orbit. It does nothing except beep. It's called Sputnik, and it terrifies half the world. But here's what nobody tells you. That little beeping ball didn't just spark the space race. It planted the seed for the internet you're using right now. Because scientists realized something extraordinary. If you put a satellite in the right orbit, it could bounce signals between 2 points on Earth, like a mirror in space. By 1962, the US launched Telstar 1, the first active communications satellite. It broadcast live television across the Atlantic Ocean. People watched it happen in real time and wept. The world had just gotten smaller. Fast forward to the 1990s. The internet is born, email is new and exciting, dial-up modems screech like angry robots. And engineers ask, what if we could skip the cables entirely and beam the internet from space? The first satellite internet services launched around 1996. They were painfully slow, astronomically expensive, and had a quirk that drove users absolutely mad: lag. Horrible, brutal lag. Why? Well, that's where physics gets involved, and physics does not negotiate. Here's the science, and I promise to make it fun. Traditional satellite internet used what's called geostationary Earth orbit, or GEO. These satellites float roughly 35,786 kilometers above the equator. At that exact altitude, they orbit the Earth at the same speed the Earth rotates. So from the ground, they appear perfectly still, like a giant invisible antenna bolted to the sky. That's impressive engineering. But here's the problem. Light travels at 300,000 kilometers per second. Fast, right? But even light takes about 240 milliseconds to make the round trip from your home up to that satellite, down to a ground station and back. That's nearly a quarter of a second just for the signal to say hello. For email and basic browsing, manageable. For gaming, video calls, or real-time applications, a disaster. You'd ask a question and wait what feels like an eternity for an answer. Then came the revolution. What if instead of one massive satellite parked 36,000 kilometers up, you put hundreds or thousands of tiny satellites in low Earth orbit, just 500 to 600 kilometers above the surface? The distances are dramatically shorter. The latency drops to 20 to 40 milliseconds, comparable to cable internet. And because you have so many satellites, there's always one overhead no matter where you are on Earth. This idea wasn't new, but making it work at massive scale, that required a billionaire, a rocket company, and an absolutely audacious gamble. Enter Elon Musk and SpaceX. In 2015, SpaceX announced Starlink, an ambitious plan to blanket the entire Earth in satellite internet coverage using a constellation of thousands of small flat satellites in low Earth orbit. The world was skeptical. The technical challenges were mind-bending. You'd need to launch thousands of satellites. You'd need to manage them without crashing into each other. You'd need a dish that customers could set up themselves in their backyard. And here's where the story gets genuinely moving. remote villages in the Amazon rainforest, nomadic families in Mongolia, fishing boats in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Antarctic research stations, war zones, disaster relief sites, places that have never had reliable internet, some that have never had internet at all, suddenly connecting to the world at speeds that would make a city dweller jealous. A school in rural Alaska went from dial-up equivalent speeds to video streaming quality overnight. A doctor in a remote African clinic started conducting telemedicine consultations via satellite. A soldier in Ukraine used Starlink terminals to coordinate communications in an active conflict zone. The satellite isn't just a tech gadget. It's become infrastructure. It's become lifeline. But Starlink isn't alone in this race. Amazon is building Project Kuiper. The UK and India have their own constellations in development. Even OneWeb, which went bankrupt in 2020, was bought by the British government and relaunched. The satellite internet space is now one of the most competitive arenas in tech history. So, how does this actually reach you at home? You order a kit. Inside is a flat, round dish called a phased array antenna and a router. You put the dish somewhere with a clear view of the sky, plug it in, and within minutes, you're online. But what's happening inside that dish is extraordinary. There's no moving motor, no dish rotating to track satellites. Instead, it uses thousands of tiny electronic elements that can electronically steer a beam of radio waves, shifting focus from one satellite to the next as they fly overhead, seamlessly handing off your connection like a relay race in space. Your data leaves your laptop, travels to the dish, shoots up to a satellite 550 kilometers overhead, gets routed through a network of satellites, sometimes using intersatellite laser links to skip ground stations entirely, and arrives at a server somewhere on Earth. The reply, same journey reversed, total time, under 50 milliseconds. Physics, engineering, and decades of human ingenuity, all so you can stream a cat video. Worth it. But let's be honest, this story isn't all rocket launches and happy endings. Astronomers are furious. Tens of thousands of satellites in low orbit create bright streaks across the night sky, ruining long exposure telescope images. Scientists trying to study distant galaxies are increasingly finding their data contaminated by satellite glare. Then there's the space debris problem. With so many satellites launching and inevitably some failing, the risk of orbital collisions grows. One collision creates a chain of debris that can trigger what scientists call the Kessler syndrome, a cascading catastrophe that could make certain orbits unusable for generations. But there are cost concerns too. At roughly $120 a month in many markets, Starlink is still out of reach for the world's poorest communities, the very people who need connectivity the most. And cybersecurity experts warn that satellite internet infrastructure could become a target for state-sponsored hacking. The sky is no longer the limit. It's now a battlefield of ambition, commerce, regulation, and unintended consequence. So, where are we headed? SpaceX has regulatory approval for up to 42,000 Starlink satellites. Amazon plans to launch 3,200 Kuiper satellites by 2029. The ITU, the UN body that governs radio spectrum, is wrestling with how to fairly allocate orbital slots to emerging nations before the prime spots are all claimed by wealthy tech companies. Speeds are improving. The next generation of Starlink satellites carries laser intersatellite links that allow data to travel through space rather than through the atmosphere, which is actually faster because space has no air to slow light down. And in the next decade, satellite internet may become the primary connectivity layer for autonomous vehicles, IoT sensors, remote surgery, and real-time disaster response systems across the globe. The promise is simple and staggering: full Earth coverage, no dead zones, no one left offline. From a beeping metal sphere in 1957 to a flat dish on a rooftop in 2024, delivering 200 megabits per second from space. Humanity has always looked up at the sky and dreamed. But now, for the first time in history, the sky is looking back and handing us a Wi-Fi password.